And this
We're
weather is
live.
really cold.
It is really cold. Did anybody watch the Bills game though? That was a good game.
That was good. But I don't know.
The Bills got lucky the other day.
I don't care what you say. All championship teams have some form of luck on their side in order to win a championship.
Absolutely. Who was it that said, I find that the harder I work, the luckier I get. So they go hand in hand. All right, we ready to start?
One second. I'm just yeah. Okay, you guys are good.
Yeah, I get the notice that we're live stream now, so we should be good.
All right, cool.
All right, so just to refresh, and I'm going to share my screen. Um, this is kind of where we left off last week. We walked through the process. We got some notes down. We need to, either myself or you know a few of us need to take a stab at writing this into something more presentable to the rest of the group. But we started with talking about reorganization or organization, where we kind of bifurcate some of the responsibilities. We figured that pulling public pools and family campgrounds away from the environmental engineering program would allow the environmental engineering program to focus and specialize on the items that they really need to focus and specialize on, which are subsurface sewage disposal, water treatment, and wastewater, water treatment, wastewater, disposition of human remains, and an establishment of an alternate technology section at DPH, which would
Hey,
require some additional staffing.
hey, Matt.
Um, yep.
Hi, this is Miriam Miller. I apologize for interrupting. I'm sitting in for Adam Scavera. I'm the Director for Policy and Strategic Initiatives at DPH. I just want to flag that this wouldn't necessarily be a legislative recommendation because the legislature does not typically or does not have a say in kind of how agencies are organized and how their org charts are set up. I think if there's a question around you know, what the scope of responsibilities for DPH should be, if it needs to include AT or if it needs to include additional responsibilities or policy matters. Those would be, that's the recommendation. And then the department would kind of look at the legislative language and put a fiscal note on it. But the agency would ask that we don't have a recommendation that directly implicates our organizational chart. That's kind of that is outside of the scope of what this working group was asked to do.
I understand. One of the things that we've kind of tried to do here first is really wanted to prioritize where we felt there were shortfalls and where we felt there were needs, and then how we finally craft that as an overall organization. We can worry about that when the entire committee is together. We're looking at the process, and it's hard to look at process without people. So we're taking a stab at it, and what the final recommendation to legislature is the final recommendation to legislature. But we're identifying problems and shortfalls, and really this is the most efficient way to do that. When we
So
come out of this as a subcommittee, we'll go to the regular committee, and the regular committee will craft the final language. But I think it's too hard to try to split, what those recommendations are, without addressing them.
yeah, I mean, I
So,
think if you're talking about process, that's like that's in my mind, that's more like what do you need the agency to be doing, rather than looking at what the kind of pools or whatever, like that's not relevant to this working group. So I would just kind of push back a little bit on that. And I would say that, you know, DPH would.
And I think we would push back on the fact that if people are worrying about pools and campgrounds and not engineering septics and sewer systems, that's, you know, we think it is, because it's, you know, it's in contrast to what they should be working on. If we're talking about
Well,
housing,
not
how this
necessarily, because
organization
it's
can,
also, those are also statutory responsibilities of the agency. So,
okay, Bob had his hand up. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Really kind of what you guys are just talking about is what is kind of just how much detail we put into our recommendations. So maybe what it is we want the EEP program to have more focus on the sewage disposal system process, and maybe take away some of the other responsibilities. It's not our probably responsibility to decide where in DPH those go. And we're not saying that those things aren't important. It's just that we need this group to be more focused on the septic stuff. So how that happens should be left to DPH, but I think we could make a recommendation that it needs to be moved out of this particular structured.
I see you Googling me.
Yeah. I just wanted to understand where you were in the organization.
I'm happy to answer that
You can
question.
give
My
us-
name's,
that'd be great.
again, yep, I am the director for the Office of Policy and Strategic Initiatives. I oversee legislation and regulation, and I report directly to and I provide policy advisement to the commissioner, and I report to a deputy commissioner. If you have any other questions about me, I'm happy to answer those.
Go ahead, Jim.
Good morning, everyone. Per this PowerPoint presentation that we got presented to us about last month or a month and a half ago, under the process and funding, it says clarify interactions with land use process, identify bottlenecks in septic approvals, define agency roles in approvals, and establish substantial funding. Okay, so those are the 4 bullet comments or outlines based on what we've been looking at. And I would say that the reorganization of EEP would fall underneath the bottlenecks for septic approval. So I understand that you're giving us, Miriam, you're giving us some really good insights, but I wish that insight was provided to us from the beginning. We're hanging our hat right now that this setup is to minimizing bottlenecking of sewage disposal systems approval at the state level.
All right. So kind of revisiting where we were, and this is how we, you know, bifurcated the two organizations. We talked a little bit about staffing, and to, you know, in defense, we also did talk that we don't set staffing, and we don't set funding. But our recommendations could be something along the lines that, you know, pre-2020 staffing levels were adequate to handle just the EEP mission area without the bleed over of public pools and family campgrounds. And then we started in on policy, local health departments and districts reviewing, approving, and inspection of SSDS up to 5,000 gallons per day in an individual system. We flagged that this would be a modification of the public health code. And that's kind of as far as we got. The rest in blue was from Jim's original email. And then we had just other topics that we wanted to expound upon and develop some kind of recommendation. Again, we are in draft form here. We're getting ideas on the paper. We're trying to figure out where we're going to go from here. You know, those other topics that we flagged were speed of review, moonlighting provisions, fee structure and fees reflective of the work with direct funding, not general fund, work from home concerns, in reference to continuity of knowledge and training, and then failure of existing systems, lean/loan programs. And failure of existing systems, Bob brought that one up to me outside. Like I asked everybody to send me as much as they are. And again, the work from home is kind of my question. Are there anything that we want to add to this list before we start trying to like go in and start to come up with ideas and input on any of these other topics? Go ahead, Bob.
Matt, have we really addressed this whole process of something like the Codes and Standards Committee and kind of modification of the advisory committee? I don't know if we've really fully detailed out what we're thinking there.
Yeah, that was it. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked off of that part there. We have the training education, which we need to populate, and then also the Code and Advisory Committee, and how that works and how we provide people to that, and then what the scope of their work is, if we expand it or make it more formal along those lines. I think the next hand was Jim. Jim, go ahead.
Just a question for Miriam. I know that you quickly look at what I proposed as a draft for funding. Is that something that can be sent up to the legislator, or is that something that can't?
Yeah, so a request for funding would get sent to the legislature. DPH can't necessarily endorse requests for funding without going through OPM because our budget is determined by them and not individually. I will flag that I think an education and training fund is a fair request, but I would recommend that it goes just to the Department of Public Health and not because the environmental engineering program is not named in statute. And that kind of gets back into, mucking with the org chart in statute, which kind of creates problems and challenges for future commissioners and iterations of the department. So I would establish the fund in the department, and then we would assign it to the environmental engineering program.
Right. So this funding is not, I'm going to say, per taxpayers. This funding is going to come per individual septic permits throughout the state of Connecticut. So you go ahead.
Yeah, so the challenge, and we've talked about this in other working groups, when you pay for a septic permit, if it goes to the state, all of that funding goes into the general fund and it can't go back to the department. So that's kind of a statewide policy for every fee that's charged. So we charge a lot of fees for practitioner licensing, facility licensing. We institute penalties. Any fee that the state charges, regardless of the agency, goes into the general fund.
Well, the state will be this will be coming from a local fee level. The building officials, they charge 29 cents to 1,000, whatever, for an education fund. Okay, and the state building department, well, that falls under the state, doesn't fall under DPH. How can they have their own separate funding for education? And we can't have and EEP can't have their own separate funding for training and education, coming from a individual septic permit fee, which is tied in associated under the environmental engineering program.
Yeah, so that can be a recommendation, but I would say that it's unlikely to be implemented in that way just because of how the state budget operates. But if that's the recommendation that you guys want to do, that's fine. It might just be challenging for us to operationalize. But I think as long as the funding is directed towards DPH, that kind of addresses my primary concern, and anything around kind of how that fund is created, I think is going to have to be a negotiation with PM.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that addresses the comment that I had around directing the training program to DPH rather than the program itself. because again, the program is not named in statute. All responsibilities of scope of the agency, regardless of what it is, everything we do with healthcare regulation, everything is just assigned to DPH, and then the agency assigns it throughout the
Well,
org chart.
what other fees coming from local health departments or health districts are directed towards any other any other programs? So that's my. You're talking globally. I'm looking at what's the key. No, I guess the 2025 is silo.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a silo approach that it's a one-way. It's a two-way street between the local health department and EEP. That these fundings are just goes between those two organizations, and that money is just earmarked only for education and training. Once it gets into
Yeah.
the fund, then I'm looking at 100% of the money generated through these septic permits go directly to this individual funding for training and education. Once it gets into why should they go into the general fund and other people can grab that money
Yeah.
that separate fee? I find that a little heartbreaking.
Yeah, I get it, Jim, and quite frankly, it's really tough for us because, if you look at the way we do newborn screening and the operational costs of us running the state lab, we don't get any of that money, and the state lab then runs amok on our budget, right? So it's just it is how it is. That's how it is for every state agency. It's really tough, and we all have to work through it. But if you guys want to advocate for it to be done differently, that's fine. That's just not necessarily a recommendation that DPH would be able to get behind. But I understand the concern and how it should work. And I understand it doesn't really make sense, but they've made this change statewide, agency-wide several years ago, and we have to live with it.
Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Matt. I think we just need, as a committee, to recognize that our charge is really to advise the legislators that are involved in this effort of where we see problems, where we don't necessarily have to have the solutions, but we need to at least point out the things that aren't working properly with the way the system is running now. And then it's for them to say, okay, we need to change statutes, we need to change stuff within DPH, we need to add staffing, money, whatever it is, but I don't think we should limit ourselves to what we see as problems. It's for them to decide if they want to fix any of the problems. I mean, I hate to be that harsh with it, but I don't want to limit what we're making suggestions on, I guess. But we don't have to necessarily have the total solution vetted out within this committee or subcommittee. That's my understanding of kind of what our responsibility is.
Yeah. And at some point we have to, the overall organization has to make recommendations to legislators. And then what that singular voice is and how powerful that is will be based on, if we're all in accord or if we have dissension. And if we have dissension, then we'll have to highlight what points we don't agree upon. And I'm sure that some of the government agencies might have to say, we can't weigh in on that because it's outside of our charter. But go ahead, John.
So I just wanted to clarify, and I think I may have missed a section of the conversation, that the issue I think Miriam you were raising is that it's not for this entity or DPH to say where fees that are collected then go. Is that the point you're making?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not necessarily a DPH policy. Right. It's kind of a statewide policy that whenever fees or penalties or any type of money is collected, it all goes to the general fund right now. Okay.
All right. So go ahead.
Sorry. So one thing you can do is kind of basically, if you're collecting a fee, you would have that's kind of a revenue fiscal note. Mm-hmm. And then kind of in the back end, they'll be like, okay, well, like the state's raising this much, is projected to raise this much money from this, so we'll allocate them that much money, right? Okay. And it might not be one for one, but just flagging that it's not going to come directly into our budget.
Okay. All right. So, Matt, the state does this all the time. Historically, the fee bill, and I'll try to be brief. The fee bill collected a land use surcharge on all planning and zoning and wetlands applications at a local level, dumped that into a fund at DEP, and then that was reallocated out to conservation districts and the environmental review team and some other things. So there's a mechanism for collection of fees, and then I think probably, as Miriam said, it's probably separate, but the state does this all the time. And then maybe 15 years ago, there was a conveyance charge for town clerk filing. So if you record a deed or whatever at town clerk, there's a surcharge that goes into the Community Investment Act. I mean, probably goes into the general fund, as Miriam said, but then it comes out as part of the Community Investment Act that goes to affordable housing, open space, farmland preservation, and historic preservation. So there is a long history of, pairing a collection of fees, even though it might go to the general fund, with that dedicated education or fund. So I think, maybe it's an extra step, but I think our recommendation is still strong that, here is a need, here is a revenue stream, let's pair those and leave it at that.
Yeah. And I mean, I can understand why the government would like to sweep everything into a general fund, and then because you set your budget and then you want to maintain your budget regardless of where revenue comes in. Especially, in government, that's how they do it. Like in business, we don't have that ability. We have to tie it to, where the revenue comes in to where we can spend it. But, it's an accounting game, and you set the budget for DPH at X, and you can't have it be variable for the year of 2026 based on how many permits are pulled. It's hard. That's hard work. So, that's probably why everything is swept up into the general fund. But yeah, if we can try to earmark it, then maybe that, and maybe it lags a year. If 2025 generates X number of dollars in fees, then you get those X number of dollars in 2026 for training. I don't know how that works, but you're right. If we can just try to tie them together, then it's the government's problem to figure out how to make it work. All right. So where do we want to go from here?
So again, I think that you can make the recommendation that the funding be allocated towards the department for this purpose. But I'm just flagging that it would more be like revenue generated from this, that goes into the general fund should fund an education program, or education program, can be funded through revenue generated from X. So I'm just trying to flag that it's going to be an additional component of your negotiation.
Jim?
I just randomly picked up a $25 fee. So, and I just gave an example based on from 2000. Oh, I forgot. I apologize. I should have put down in the year 2024, we had 208 septic permits. So, and I just picked 25 randomly, just so you have a number that the Chatham Health District would have provided $5,200, towards this education and training fund. I try to come up with an acronym, EF. I don't know if that sounds appealing, but so I just wanted you guys. I just randomly picked that number out. That's a number we can talk about and decide what numerical value we want to present.
But I think we should talk about what the goals of the training are going to be. What kind of training do we most need for deep and for local authorities? I'm just going to kind of make another area down here, and
I think any and a lot of that's going to be up to, up to Matt, what type of training they're going to do. In the past, training, majority of training was, or the big issue was, soil testing. Um, there should there be further, further training. If we are collecting funds, for septic permits, does the state need to start training some of these, septic installers on some of the new technologies and the code? Do we need to expand the training classes for phase 1 and phase 2 for the upcoming sanitarians to get their certification in reviewing plans and inspecting septic systems? We might need training on AI if or AT if it comes down the pike. But to pinpoint what needs to be trained, that's going to be a scenario that's always going to be ever changing and moving. So as long as the funds are associated with anything doing with training or education, that's what it should be earmarked for, and only earmarked for.
Yeah, so what I would think would give the biggest bang for the buck, and obviously Jim covered the first one, is soil testing. So we have a soils training seminar. Historically, that's a great training program. So that would be something that would be good to keep going. And that's basically these 2 or 3 day seminars where we actually go out in the field. We have a facility and we read soil tests and teach you, in the field, because it's one of those things where you really can't learn in a classroom. So I think that would be one of the best usage, resource type of training. The second thing would be having better field training for the sanitarians. And so whereas, we do have our phase 1 and phase 2 training, which is obviously classroom, but field training historically was supposed to come from, senior members within a local health department. So in other words, you had people that had working in a health department that had been there for years. And then when the new staff came on board, they sort of did an informal apprenticeship within them. And unfortunately, that's happening less and less because of what I call the great retirement. So to pick up the slack would be probably some type of training mechanism that did field training. And ideally, a few years back, there was a facility in Ellington that had a site that would have been ideal for that. But so something like that would probably be a good use of resources to get the biggest bang for your buck, to get sanitarians trained. And obviously, the goal here would be to have a uniformity in how they enforce the health code across the state. So getting this type of training would definitely enforce that and make sure that, when you deal with this town or this district, you're going to be treated the same way and then the next one over.
Good. What other, that soil testing, that field training, there's a lot of synergies between those two. Because like if you get that field training program, at a location, and then you can have these 2 to 3 day seminars to include, refreshment and local and other installers and whoever really needs to get to that training. But that's kind of got duplicity there. So
what, I should mention one thing too with the field training, that could also carry over. So what I should be specific with the field training. Field training would be something on how to conduct an inspection, which the sanitarians do. So what they would have to do is, when they go out and do a final inspection, they have to identify these field components. They have to shoot elevations or at least participate in that process. So that's a little different than the soil testing, which is a separate process. Yes, that is a field activity. But the good news is with the field training, let's say you had that type of training, that could also be useful for licensed sewage installers and even young engineers that are getting into the field. That could utilize that. So whatever, let's say a facility that was set up to do this, they could get revenue from that as well. In other words, not just sanitarians, but also perhaps people that want to go into the trade of installing septic systems, i.e., septic installers, or engineers that are specific to septics. Having this field training would be a very useful tool that they don't necessarily get other than just with people that are, let's say, above them in their position.
Rob?
Yeah, I agree with Matt. And I think we should add it's not just installers and local sanitarians, but also young engineers that, maybe aren't doing a lot of septics or just starting to figure that out. So they may read soils differently. Maybe they don't know the health code or the technical standards as well as they could. I mean, Jim, I love listening to Jim. He rattles off the sections of the code like, I
He's
read.
got them written in the corner of his screen. He just
Yeah. But I mean, clearly, seriously, you know the health code, Jim, and I'm sure there are a lot of other guys. You have a sanitarian sitting next to you that's, referencing the book at every step, trying to figure out if this system complies. And you just know instinctively because of your years of experience. So I think there's some training there of both the the overall health code and the technical standards, and a little bit of just how they mesh together. So Matt's probably got a pretty good handle on. I mean, my guess is that we have the staff already in place that knows how to do the training of what needs to be trained. We just need to provide the process and the system and the funding to make that happen. It's just not happening now because of those shortages.
I would add that
So
it's not
Matt,
necessarily just because of shortages. Like everything we do as a department falls back to what we have statutory authority to do. So if we don't have statutory authority to do training, we can't do training. So if that's something that you guys want us to be doing, like that's a policy decision that we would then kind of adjust our funding request to the legislature based off of. So that's what I'm really trying to get at, is that the kind of the policy decisions and recommendations that these groups make will then kind of go back on the end with the legislature to say, if this is the direction you want to go, this is how it would have to be funded through the department. So that's really, what I'm trying to get at. So if statutory training, if training is something you guys want us to do, we need authority to do that, because we also can't spend money in a way that we don't have authority to spend it.
Matt, are you advocating for like a location that you would do this training at, or are you advocating for, okay, you have a training cadre, and there's probably people's, collateral duties basically, and you set up different courses throughout the year and you go to different locations. So you constantly be on the hunt for the right location. Maybe, quarter one, you're doing shoreline training, quarter two, you're doing it up in Ellington, quarter three, you're in Litchfield, and quarter four, you're over in Fairfield. I don't know what you're advocating for as far as facility requirements, or if you're just, you just need the curriculum and the clearance to do it.
Yeah, so really, we had this one. It was a septic pumping company, a very large one up in Ellington, and then they hired a former sanitarian that was retired to set up this program. They wanted to do this, so they did this on their site. I would say that something like that would be completely unique and unusual. Other states have, like Massachusetts and Rhode Island, they actually have facilities like this. We don't, and certainly, and they're not state. They're usually outside of the state, the states. At least that's what my understanding is. But anyway, it would just be one facility to keep everything uniform, if possible. I mean, I don't know if this thing still
Sorry,
even is.
Matt,
is
are you
issue.
saying you want the state to have its own facility or to
No,
utilize an existing facility? Okay, I just
not
want to
at
make
all.
sure. Yeah, so
Absolutely,
the
no.
facility and location itself wouldn't necessarily be a cost, but having a centralized location where people know to go for the training. I mean, the other thing to consider too is that the state has a CT Train, which is an online training platform, and folks can enroll in courses there. So that's also readily available. But again, I think it goes back to the policy direction that this group is recommending. in terms of like, does the training need to be in person? Can it be online? That sort of thing. You have to think about accessibility challenges. You know, if you have one centralized location, is that going to really be accessible to everyone in the state? Are we going to further bottleneck the folks who need this training by having just one location where the training's done?
And this might be an opportunity for a partnership with an outside organization, like you know, the Home Builders Association might say, okay, you know what, we're going to, you know, we will facilitate this training, and DPH personnel will provide the agenda and the curriculum. We're going to find the site and provide the people to come. Maybe partner with Septic Designers of America. I don't know what their associations are, but, you know, and we put this on. Is that something that would interest you, or would you want more control from DPH?
Well, I think my point here with these two, and these are just two examples, is these are things that cannot be done in a classroom. That if you want people to be experts in both of these items, you literally have to have it's a hands-on on-site type of thing. So that's the only reason why I mentioned them. And both of them have we've had an opportunity to implement them. In other words, the soils training has been implemented over the years. And then this field training, this one facility was something unique. So this is something that you truly cannot learn in a classroom. It's like shooting elevations. You physically are using equipment. You're looking at the actual, like a septic tank partially installed they would have there. So these are things, so it would be literally like going out to a site and being an apprentice. You can't do that in a classroom with this type of facility. I mean, there could be other ideas. I'm just throwing this out there that this type of training is probably something down the road that would be very useful for not only sanitarians but also up and coming engineers, and certainly licensed or people that want to become licensed installers.
I mean, personally, as a builder, I am appalled at the lack of expertise and hands-on knowledge that we encounter with design engineers, often you know, town and government staff. When it, you know, they come with these great ideas, but no practical knowledge of how to implement them. And you know, an online course isn't going to get them to understand, you know, the challenges of test pits, and the challenges of reading the soils, and the challenges of working in the cold, and the challenges of like, you know,
Agreed. This
you know,
would
so
this
I
would
am,
yeah.
you know, I'm all in for, you know, and I think a partnership of some kind for training would be very good, because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, I have 2 or 3 job sites around the state right now that if you guys said, hey, we want to come out and do, you know, soil testing, I'd give you a whole corner of the site and give you a machine to use and a guy to run it. And you guys could, you know, dig holes to your heart's content,
You
you
know,
know,
the
and
other
I'd
thing
be
too,
glad to
guys,
host that.
yeah, to keep in mind that, when they conduct these inspections, this helps homeowners too, because it makes sure that they get the product that they paid for. So, when you have health departments not uniformly enforcing this, like in other words, you could have some health departments actually go out there and participate when they're shooting these elevations to ensure the system's level and different things like that, where others don't do that at all. And when that happens, there's a potential for things not to get done correctly. And then ultimately that could hurt the homeowner. And it's usually not something that manifests itself right away. It's 10, 15 years down the road. And then all of a sudden they're stuck with this. So there's a lot of positive implications of something like this when you have people better trained when they're doing these inspections, beyond just that they have better training. Again, it benefits the consumer as well, which is ultimately the citizens in this state. They get a product that they paid for, and that it's been inspected properly, and then it's going to function.
Well, any other areas of training that we want to add? Having heard nothing.
Well, we already are actually, we do have a process for what we call phase 1 and phase 2 training for the sanitarians. So that obviously is going to just keep, going. Although right now we're within these regulatory changes, there's going to be sort of an adjustment of how that's implemented, which is basically the classroom portion of that. So train sanitarians specifically on how to review and approve septic systems, and to a small extent, how to do some field work as well. But that's already a given. That's within, at least within the technical standards, and the regulations are going to be buttoning that up this next iteration, hopefully.
And is that in classroom training? How is that conducted now?
Yeah, so that is, well, now there is a combination of where some of it is online too. The hope is down the road that we could even create like training pods that we have digital, where you can do it at your own convenience even. So you don't necessarily have to go to the formal classroom structure. You could go to these training pods, take them, and then maybe perhaps have some type of exam or something that shows your competency. So down the road, there's a lot now with this technology of being able to do things remotely and things like that. That's going to be a positive impact on this. So that would be another goal down the road, is to have that. So it's more convenient. One of the things that we were slated years ago is to try to make it easier for people to obtain these licenses, to become sanitarians, things like that. So by offering training in this form where they can take the training at their convenience, I definitely think that helps people to get into these fields. So that would be that would be a goal I would think would be worthy, down the road.
Okay. Jim?
I think part of that phase 1, phase 2 is approval, even though I think going forward, what Matt says, doing these pods are good, but the state then is relying, and maybe I'm overstepping boundaries, Matt, but I think then the state is relying that person, once they get certified, are going to go to a health department or a health district, to get guidance. There's one thing to be book knowledge, and then you got to go out there in the field, and then you got to start reviewing the engineer's plans, that they're being also guided by the health department or health district that they're in, and they're not just getting thrown out into out to the wolves. Septic installers. In order to become a licensed septic installer, you got to work underneath a licensed septic installer, and the licensed septic installer has to notify the sanitarian that he has, I'll say, a trainee or apprentice ahead of time. And then the apprentice has to be out there for all the inspections. They can't get a sign off on a septic tank inspection only. They have to get a sign off on this sheet by the sanitarian minimum of the installation of a leaching system and or a complete septic system, septic tank and leaching fields. And they got to get 4 sign-offs. And then once they get those 4 sign-offs and fill out the application, then they can be submitted. Then they submit all that paperwork to the state, and then they're eligible to take an exam. I think CARA, what's that, Connecticut On-Site Wastewater Association, they have training classes once a year for up-and-coming licensed septic installers. So that's the license. In order to become a licensed septic installer, you got to work under an installer. You got to get 4 sign-offs by a sanitarian and pass the exam. That's the Reader's Digest version.
Do you, as a sanitarian, do they pay you a special fee for that extra, that sign off, or how do you reimburse for that, or do you guys just do it out of the goodness
That's part of the job.
All right.
We give more than what we take.
All right. All right. Where do you guys want to go from here?
Well, I meant to look at, I mean, that last meeting when we had, last Wednesday, they talked about the Connecticut Clean Water Fund, General Statutes 22A, 475 to 485. I gotta look into that because there might be something that we can tap into, but I don't know if you can tap in anything from the Connecticut Clean Water Fund, for subsurface. That was an eye opener.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know if $25 is the right amount, or you're just gonna let it ride with that, or you wanna discuss that numerical value?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that like we don't know how much revenue you need to generate to know the cost of the ideal training program. So that's one of those things that the recommendation might come across the line of Department of Public Health and with the assistance of some local health departments derive what the training program that DPH is now tasked to put on, and then figure out how much that's going to cost, and then create a earmarked fee, to offset that cost. Because I mean, Bob and I have both said several times that like the fees for septics aren't horrible. Like they're probably on the lower end of the spectrum. So like there's we're willing to pay for better service and faster review and more competent performance on that pipeline. So I don't think you get a lot of pushback from the public on those fees if they're delivering a better product. Miriam.
I think for the purposes of this group and the recommendation, I think you could just say we would recommend a fee that would offset the cost of this training, and then let OFA and OPM kind of figure that one out. It would also give DPH the opportunity to kind of think more holistically about what the training would look like. So if you guys have a policy recommendation of what the training would include, you can put that in the training. But then as far as the cost and everything, that would kind of be figured out on the back end once the training is designed. And we can go from there.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bob.
Matt, before we get off the whole training and education, I'm just wondering about, we've talked about retirement and losing the historical knowledge of a lot of the sanitarians that have been around a long time. I assume there's a shortage of new sanitarians coming into the business. And so, what is the training process currently for them? And how do we encourage more people to get involved so that we don't have this shortfall? Just like John, I'm sure the planning side of this business is very short-staffed and not a good pipeline of new people coming in. So is there something as part of this education that there should be some sort of incentives or encouragement or process to get more people interested in getting involved in this?
Are you
Yeah.
asking me, Bob, or?
Well, yeah, whether you or Jim know, I mean, I don't know what the
Sure.
current system is, but I'm guessing there's
Yeah.
a shortfall of people. So how do we get more people? Because obviously that comes into the quality of the inspections, the quality of the process of how do we get it done? And if we don't have enough people doing it, then there's going to be a timing issue of how quickly our applications get moved through the system.
Yeah, the only thing I can say is I know our department, not just with this, but with all of the public health fields, was actively, identified this as an issue that people. So I wasn't involved in that specifically. I just know that it's on their radar, and so we'd have to look into that. But I think it's on the radar, and that was taken into consideration, that people, what types of things can get people into these fields and train properly and things like that. I think just off the top of my head, I just recall that, some of the things that were discussed were, the little that I did know, or was involved in, was just something about, making sure, getting the training was easy, fees were reasonable, there wasn't a lot of red tape associated with it. That's just an example of what I was, the limited amount that I understand.
What is the pipeline for that?
Oh,
Like, what is the
well,
current
yeah,
pipeline
I
if
mean,
I
a
want to
lot
become
of
a
them,
sanitarian?
they'll
What is
go to
the
school and they'll typically get something, biology or public health field. Southern Connecticut State University has a specific training path for people that want to go into public health, and we, amongst other programs in DPH, we actually do that training in conjunction with the university. So there's like a 4-week class for septic. There's one for food, and different public health fields. And then they actually are, it's part of a university class that they take. So that, in other words, that's a partnership that DPH has had with Southern over the years, and that's worked pretty well. But that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. Oh,
Jim?
you know what? Wait, real quick. I'm sorry. So I didn't really answer your question. So once they get the degree or whatever, although that's not necessarily a requirement, but they would take the phase 1 and phase 2 class, and the phase 1 and phase 2 training, which offered twice a year for phase 1. One course is in the Southern, the one that I just discussed, and then another one's in the fall. And then the phase 2 is only offered once a year, and that's in the fall, right after phase 1. So that would be the process. So once they get that, they take the class, they pass the exam, they get the certification. But then once they, to actually implement the certification, they actually have to get sort of, I don't want to say deputized by the local health department, but the director of health has to acknowledge that they're their representative to conduct these, their phase 1 training representative and things like that. So ultimately, that's the process right there. Sorry.
Okay. Jim?
If you work for a bigger health department or health district, you might have a person go through that phase 1 and phase 2, and then maybe they might be called, maybe a sanitarian, okay, but they're not a registered sanitarian, or I guess the new term now is environmental health specialist, registered sanitarian. But in order to become a registered sanitarian, to get that blue card license, you need a 4-year degree. You need 30 science credits, and then you have to take the NEHA exam, the New England Health Association exam, to become a registered sanitarian. Before that occurred, I got my RS based on a scenario where another sanitarian, brought up to the legislator, why do you have to have a bachelor's degree if you have years of experience? So I'm probably the last registered sanitarian in the state of Connecticut without a bachelor's degree with an RS. Even before that, you had to have a bachelor's degree, and the state of Connecticut issued out the RS exam. But as time went by, the state of Connecticut then passed that off to NEHA, and now all the exams are through them. And then Miriam, I appreciate the insight. I'm a KISS person. I keep it simple. I would love to have just a flat one-time fee for the education. To have that go through that rigmarole of how much the education and training that would occur at EEP, then that fee could change yearly, and that could be a logistic nightmare logistically for the finance department and administration department associated with the health departments.
Yeah, just to clarify, Jim, that it wasn't my recommendation to have, a fluid fee, but more that, giving folks time to actually project what the fee should be to offset the costs would be it, right? So if you say it costs, X number of dollars to pay the trainer, X number of dollars to pay the DPH staff to develop the training, you kind of project how much it would cost per person, and then you just charge that flat fee. But we need to kind of do that back end work, to your point, to make sure that, maybe $25 is the right fee. Maybe it's $27, right? Like, but just taking the time to do that math, set it as a flat rate. And then, in the future, if costs go up, we need to adjust it to $30, we can, but you just do the back end work to make sure that the price is accurate. So I'm not recommending, and you can put the price in statute too. But I'm not recommending a fluid price at all, but more just saying you need to do the back end work to make sure that it is the right rate.
Well, like always, we've gotten to the end of the hour pretty quickly. Is everybody planning on attending to meeting? I know, John, you cannot be there.
Right, sorry.
Bob's there. Anybody else not gonna make it? Any final guidance for us, John, as we go to tomorrow's meeting?
No, I think pushing forward, we're recognizing that we can't, make direct, staffing or funding changes. I think there are mechanisms in place, and we just can, build on the history of funding programs through special revenue, but just make sure it's paired. And I think that the training is real important for that.
But any other final thoughts? And then we'll see you guys tomorrow on the small screen again.
I'll miss tomorrow's meeting. I got a very important meeting. We have our Christmas holiday party with the Chatham Health District. So,
I didn't get an invite. What happened there?
And then I'm more than happy to work with you, Matt, to try to button up and clean up the our funding ideas up to, up to the state, because we got to get that going.
Sounds good. All right, guys, have a great one. We'll talk again.
Thanks, everyone.
Matt.
Good day.